Now, the event, of course, that's dominated the week has been the Boston's bombings, those terrible bombings at the end of the Boston Marathon on their Monday holiday. Now, our hearts, of course, go out to the victims, their families, the survivors, the people of Boston, and, of course, the law enforcement authorities of that city, which have worked so hard and suffered their own losses this week. I think that the media, politicians, commentators in general this week were pretty responsible in the way they didn't jump to conclusions about what might be behind these bombings. They decided to wait for the facts. But now we know the facts, and most of us have realised, I suppose, our gravest fears, and that is, of course, that the young men who perpetrated this were radicalised Muslims. We now know this. Now, the problem now, I think, is that many politicians, many commentators, and yes, many journalists seem to want to avoid that simple fact. They're avoiding the word Islam, the word Muslim. It seems impossible to talk about this story and talk about the threat that it demonstrates, the problems it throws up for us in Western democracies, without talking about the fact that this was an attack by Islamic extremists. We have journalists and politicians wanting to sort of self-censor these facts out of the story. Now, this is no good at all. I think it's weak and it's dishonest and it's dangerous. Now, we know, of course, that there are large, vibrant, constructive, peaceful Muslim communities in all of the Western democracies, of course, including Australia's. We've had a great input from Muslim people in this country since the 19th century. Now, we need to be able to talk about Islamic extremism, the threat it poses in Western democracies, the threat it still poses in Australia, without thinking that we're slurring every Muslim and the Muslim community in general. In fact, we need to engage the moderate Muslim community in this conversation if we're going to address this threat. We need to be able to be prepared to speak about it, to call it what it is, and talk about our ongoing efforts to combat it. Here in Australia, where, of course, we have had terrorist plots thwarted, people arrested, charged and incarcerated for these terrorist threats. We need to be ever vigilant. We need to be mature enough to talk about the threat that we're confronting. That is my viewpoint, and I'll be back after the break to start our conversation about some of these economic issues, the carbon tax and the looming budget crisis.